Hello. Yeah, cool. Hello. My name is Steele. I use they, she pronouns, and I am also a rank and file member of DSA, Nashville, or Middle Tennessee chapter, rather. And I am Black, trans femme person, and yeah, I am a Marxist Leninist, and well, have a big old boner for anti imperialism, as it were. So very excited for this conversation with Austin. And my first question, and all of my all of my discussions like these are, how do you identify Austin?
Sure. So I can introduce myself a little bit here and also get into a little bit of how I identify politically, right? I assume that is kind of the essence of that question, right? So
No.
so yeah, first of all, my name is Austin Gonzalez. I use he, him pronouns. I'm originally from the Richmond, Virginia chapter of DSA. As Mina mentioned, I am a member of the International Committee through being a member of the National Political Committee. So I liaise to the International Committee directly through them. Yeah, so with people I identify, I like to call myself a 21st century socialist, right? Now, what the hell does that even mean, right? Well, I identify with the 21st century socialist tradition, much like the examples that I'm going to get into a little bit here with Venezuela, right? I think that in places like Venezuela, they've been able to develop a bit of a model that incorporates aspects of many different political tendencies on the left. I think one of the things I love the most about Venezuela and the example of Venezuela is that there are lessons to be learned for social democrats in Venezuela, I would argue. There are lessons to be learned for anarchists in Venezuela, I would argue. And there are definitely lessons to be learned for Marxist Leninists in Venezuela that I would argue. And this is why, once again, I refer to myself as a 21st century socialist, and that's the tendency that I identify the closest with.
Well, thank you for that, Austin. Um, then my first question regarding your trip, I suppose. Uh, why don't you tell us about the work of the International Committee leading up to the decision to go to the Bicentennial Conference?
Absolutely. And something you will all get to know very quickly here is that I can rant for very long times about basically every aspect of this trip. So I will do my best to condense things here. This is a really important question, right? Because these sorts of things, they don't just happen overnight, right? It's not like myself and my fellow NPC liaison to the International Committee, Blanca Estevez. It's not like we just went to the NPC one day with a resolution saying, "Hey, we're going to Venezuela." No, no, no. There was a lot of work within the International Committee that had to bring us to this point, right? If you'd have told me, for any of my fellow old heads here, right, who were at the 2019 National Convention, if you'd have told me in 2019, oh yeah, in 2 years' time, DSA is going to be sending a delegation to Venezuela, I would not have believed it, right? Because of the state of the International Committee at the time, right? Now, what do I mean by that, right? When I got elected to the NPC in 2019, one of my personal goals and one of the goals that I know a lot of folks in the organization shared was twofold when it came to the International Committee, right? Right. One, refocusing it toward what I like to call principled anti-imperialism, right? Because I do not believe that it was representing that very well. And two, which is the reason number one was a thing, the reason that they weren't principled anti-imperialists, I would argue, is that the committee was not fully opened up, right? The committee was closed off. The committee was, the International Committee is one of the oldest committees in DSA. So a lot of members within the committee that were in the committee at the time had been there for a very long time. These were people that had been in DSA for 10 plus years, right? And they had occupied this space within the International Committee. And essentially, because it was, once again, a closed off committee, it was their opinions that dominated the foreign policy of our organization, right? My belief when I got elected to the NPC, and the belief shared also by Blanca Estevez, who I will mention again because she is a critical part of how this was all able to happen, was that we should open up the International Committee, right? That the International Committee should be accessible to all members, right? That any member should be able to apply to the International Committee to get involved, that anybody who's really dedicated to anti-imperialism or dedicated to building links with, socialists or leftists across the world should be able to engage with this committee, which is so critically important for any socialist movement, right? Foreign policy is a major component of what it means to me to be in touch with the international working class, right? Since the working class just doesn't stop at the US border. So one of the things we did when Blanca and myself took office on the NTC was we were assigned as liaisons to the International Committee. And one of the first conversations we had with the International Committee was just this, right? How can we restructure the committee, transform it from that was built when our organization was just like 5,000 people to where it is now, an organization of, at the time, 70,000 plus, now nearly 100,000 plus, or yeah, nearly. So once again, we had very fruitful discussions, I should say, with the then leadership of the International Committee, right? They were very receptive to the idea of opening the committee up, getting more people involved, and that was very encouraging to us, right? So fast forward a few months, right? Because we got first elected in 2019, and it was the beginning of 2020. In the beginning of 2020, Blanca, myself, and another NPC member, Abdullah Yunus, who was also a critical part of this, co-authored a resolution to present to the NPC to open up the International Committee, to totally restructure it, right? So that way we had working groups that were open to all members to be able to apply to, right? And we had two top line bodies to direct foreign policy, right? What's known as the International Secretariat, which is essentially the diplomatic wing of the International Committee, right? They oversee actual relations with foreign parties and movements abroad. And then the steering committee of the International Committee, which is more internally focused. It makes sure the working groups are doing things, make sure we're thinking about campaigns we can do domestically, what are issues we should be thinking about domestically, maybe political education sessions, they do online events a lot, which are usually somewhat popular. Also, for my old heads, you may recall in 2019, DSA International Committee, they didn't have no Twitter, right? Very not transparent at all, right? I would say it's become a much more transparent committee compared to where it was at the time. That's not to say that it isn't a work in progress. Of course it is, right? We think dialectically, dare I say, right? We're always evolving. We can always improve, right? We don't look at these things as, just static and okay, we're beautiful and perfect now, right? Anyways, the reason I do all this groundwork, and good Lord, once again, I could talk forever about this. The reason I lay all this groundwork is because once we had the committee fully opened up and had a variety of different perspectives involved in the committee, it was clear that there was a consensus toward, as I referenced earlier, principled anti-imperialism, right? No to sanctions, no to war, no to blockades, right? If there's one thing that almost, I wish I could say everybody, but almost everybody on the International Committee agrees with, it's that. No sanctions, no blockade, no war, right? So, because of this, and once again, because we had our International Secretariat developed as a body specifically designed to engage with leftist movements across the world, we established correspondence with members of the Venezuelan government and different groups affiliated with the Venezuelan government in mid-2020, right? Fast forward a couple months more, right? And it was earlier this year, it was the beginning of this year, that they reached out to myself and Blanca, telling us that there was this big press conference that was going to happen. Oh my God, Nicolas Maduro is inviting everybody in the world. Blah, blah, blah. We'd love for you guys to attend. We were like, okay, cool. This could be fun, whatever. Go into a webinar. And it was the announcement of something known as the Bicentennial Congress of the Peoples of the World, right? What the hell does that mean? Well, the Bicentennial Congress of the Peoples of the World is an event that the Venezuelans put together, specifically a couple different groups, the Institute of Simon Bolivar, which is like a think tank in Caracas that is kind of associated with the government, but not parts of the government, so to speak. It was this group that we worked with directly as far as them inviting us to attend this Bicentennial Congress, which was an event honoring the 200th anniversary of Venezuelan independence, right? So since they invited us, as well as inviting hundreds of different organizations across the world, once again, Blanca and I thought, this is important. This is Venezuelan independence. This is, if our goal in the International Committee and in the left is to end sanctions, end blockade, end war, for us, one of the first steps as the largest socialist organization in the United States is to engage with people such as the Venezuelan government critically, right? To engage with them and treat them not as some crazy pariah that should never be dealt with and, oh, we don't negotiate with terrorists, right? Which, some people are kind of that mentality. Our mentality was like, no, we should normalize this relationship, right? Treat them like people, go to this event and try to do our best to learn from them, both their successes and their failures, because Of course, things are not totally perfect in Venezuela. There's a lot we can learn on every aspect of what's been going on in Venezuela, I would argue. But once again, that's some context for the background that brought us to this point. But I will leave it at that, because once again, I could rant for a very long time about all of it.
I'm sure it all sounds very interesting. I'm very envious of the work that you get to do with the International Committee. It sounds like y'all are putting in some real work over there. That infrastructural challenge is just like setting up the committee so that it can do actual work. I'm honestly, hats off to y'all. That's really impressive. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about the itinerary of your trip?
Absolutely. Before I get into that, though, I did just plug in the DM over here the join link for the International Committee. Last I checked, we still have applications open for this period until the end of this month. I encourage anybody to join, right? Especially people in Tennessee, right? We get so many applicants from places like New York or like the larger chapters. We are always looking for people outside of those areas. Anyways, so yes, the itinerary. Oh my goodness, the itinerary was beautiful. So we were there for 2 weeks, as I mentioned. Because we were working directly with the Institute of Simon Bolivar, the Institute, once again, knowing that, okay, we're representatives from DSA, the largest socialist organization in the United States, they knew, wow, we want to actually have a time to actually like talk with you guys and engage with you, because obviously ending the blockade is something that we both want to do, right? So talking, once again, they wanted to engage on that and how, we can help each other and then things along those lines. So what they invited us to was a 2-week event, so to speak. The first week was spent exclusively in Caracas, and this was attending the Bicentennial Congress of the Peoples of the World. And once again, this was essentially a meeting of hundreds of different parties, hundreds of different people, delegates from across the world, to do networking, right? To meet each other, to say, hey, oh my gosh, you're also leftists from North America. Oh, let's talk about stuff, right? There were people from everywhere in the world that you could possibly imagine. And I'll get into that in a little greater detail in a moment. Week 2 was spent mostly in the countryside, right? And what we did in the countryside was we met with actual working Venezuelans. We met with people in the Venezuelan communes, right, which are amazing projects of true socialism, I would argue, right? And once again, that'll get into a little greater detail here as well. The first week, going back to that, once again, this was the actual Congreso itself. We had an opening plenary session on day 1, which was very interesting. Hugo Chavez's younger brother, who's a member of the government still, spoke, which was very interesting. There were a lot of different, once again, a lot of different groups. There are hundreds of different people. This gathering all took place at one of the hotels that the government has basically nationalized for these sorts of purposes. And it was also pretty awesome knowing that, like, you could tell going into these hotel rooms that, wow, this was before the government took this place over. This was clearly a place where like rich assholes in Caracas would come and like meet and plot evil shit. So it's awesome to like be here with a bunch of socialists doing the opposite. So that was fun. But yeah, there was hundreds and hundreds of people there. I was lucky enough to, at one brief moment, cross paths with and meet Evo Morales, right, the former president of Bolivia. That was amazing, right? That's a hilarious story in and of itself.
Please say more about that. Say more about that, please.
Yeah, that's freaking cool.
Sure, yeah. So a couple different things here. So going back to day 1, right? To day 1 at the Congreso. Funnily enough, so there's hundreds of people in this like banquet hall, right? Hundreds of big room, a lot of seats, a whole bunch of people. You don't even like, oh my gosh, so many people. It's amazing. Our DSA delegation, right? And there's 8 of us. I don't know if I mentioned that. We're chilling, sitting together, and I noticed right behind us is the MAS delegation, right? Evo's party. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, wait a minute, that's Adriana Salvatierra, who's like one of their most famous like members of the Bolivian Congress or whatever. I was like, oh my God, like we should like talk to them and like try to like plan something or whatever. And once again, we exchanged phone numbers and that was very interesting. Evo was not there yet at that point, right? This was just like the MAS delegation, but it was through our engagement with them that we heard. So Evo is going to be here tomorrow. And we were like, oh shit, what? The king's coming? Like my brain was, for anybody who knows me, I'm a huge Latin American politics history nerd, whatever. So my brain explodes, right? So I'm just like, oh my God, this is incredible. Once again, fast forwarding a little bit here. The next day, I woke up feeling very sick. And then this ties into the story, right? I woke up feeling very sick. I was kind of throwing up, like probably drank some bad water or something like that, some sort of stomach bug, right? So I'm like, oh geez, I'm staying in my room for the majority of the morning. I skipped the morning workshop because I was like, oh, I don't want to throw up on anybody. Geez, that would not be a good look, right? But I get a text from some of the people that are with the Venezuelan government there who have put the event together. They text me and they say, hey, Austin, we need you and a couple of your delegates in the lobby in about an hour. We're going to take a trip somewhere. And I'm just like, okay, that sounds kind of cool, right? That's okay. That's fun. Like these things kind of happen at a spur of the moment sort of thing in Venezuela. So I go down to the lobby with my other delegates, specifically Christian Hernandez and Tom Wojcik. If anybody knows who those two people are, right? Two good people, right? I would say, at least I like them. And so we're in the lobby waiting to do this trip. Eventually, and I'm still feeling sick, right? So I say to Christian and Tom, I'm like, oh, I really want to do this. I feel really bad, but I can do this. I can do this. Tom, yeah, we love Tom. Tom literally looks at me and he says, Austin, are you sure you can still go? We don't need anybody pulling an H.W. Bush, right? You know how Bush Sr. threw up on a diplomat in the early 90s. And I was like, oh, Tom, I'm totally fine. Definitely lying because I was extremely sick at this point. But anyways, what happens is what we were going to do was we were going to take a bus to the National Assembly of Venezuela to meet with some opposition legislators, right? Well, that ends up getting canceled. And because it gets canceled, I look at Christian and Tom, we're still in the lobby. I say to them, okay, I'm going to be honest, I'm super sick. I'm going back to my room. And they're like, okay, it's fine. So, I'm going back to my room. At this point, everybody's in the lobby or in workshops, right? So I go to the elevators, me and just like a couple of people near me, click the button, I'm waiting there. The elevators open and out pops Evo Morales, who has literally just arrived. And nobody knows it because once again, everybody's in workshops. So my brain, I'm immediately just starstruck, like, oh, what's happening right now? And like, immediately somebody cuts in front of me and just grabs a selfie. And in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, I got to shoot my shot right now. I got to do it. So I go up to him and he's super sweet. He's a sweetheart, right? Not like weird about it at all. Like I'm just like, oh, like in my awful Spanish, I'm like, toma una foto conmigo, por favor. And he's like, oh yeah, of course. So put my arm around him, right? He puts his arm around me. It's beautiful. He has like handlers or whatever with him. They take my phone, like it's nothing, like take a selfie or whatever. And it's interesting for anybody who has seen the picture, and I don't know, it's on my Twitter. It looks like I'm smiling really wide, and I definitely am. But during that picture, we're actually talking to each other through our masks because Evo has no idea who the hell he's even taking a picture with right now. So he says to me, so Evo says to me, he says, ¿cuál es su nombre? Just really sweet and soft spoken. What is your name, right? And I say to him, I'm like I'm just once again starstruck. I'm like, what's happening right now? I'm like, soy Austin Gonzalez de los Estados Unidos, right? And he's just like, oh, okay, yeah. And at this point, I'm like, oh my God, like as much as I would love to like stay here and like try and like hog him away from everybody else, my brain is like, oh my God, Christian and Tom are literally in the room over there. I got to go tell them so they can also do this. So I immediately run back to the lobby, right? My eyes wide, just like, and Tom's first thing that he says to me is, oh, are we still going to the assembly? And I say, no, Evo's in that room right now. If you run, you can meet him. And Tom's like, why didn't you stop him? And I was like, dude, I was too starstruck. And Tom and Christian immediately run to go see Evo. For anybody who follows these people on Twitter, you would see Christian was able to get a picture. Tom, unfortunately, was not. But no, it was, once again, it was amazing. That was kind of like, that gives you a decent frame of reference of what it was like at the Congreso, right? There were heavy hitters just walking around doing, like chilling. Like I remember at one point, like Christian, who was at it was insane. Christian, who was at like a summit of like political leaders they did, right? She's texting me, like, because I was still at the lobby, she's texting me, she's like, yeah, it's kind of, it's cool, whatever. I've just been sitting here chilling with Jaime from Ecuador. And once again, I'm a huge politics nerd. So I'm like, Jaime from Ecuador, the president of like the Indigenous Confederation? Holy shit. Like, once again, just the people you would see at this thing, it's just like, Jesus, this person was literally like in the news like a month ago for something extremely important. And once again, it was just amazing. And once again, it was a reminder to me of the importance of DSA being active in these spaces, right? why should we be turning our nose down at an event that has Evo Morales and Jaime Vargas from Ecuador and all these big, like, important, leaders of the left in Latin America and in the world, I would argue, right? We should be active in these spaces, right? We shouldn't be turning our back on these spaces. We should be once again engaging with them critically, letting them know, hey, we're socialists here in the United States. How can we help you, right? And what's amazing to me in Venezuela, and also I should mention in Peru, which I was also part of that delegation a month before this one, which that's a whole story in and of itself. In both cases, everybody was so happy to meet comrades from the United States. So happy. In both cases, people would say, "Wow, you're from the United States? That's amazing! Like, what is it like there? Like, how can we like work together closer, right?" Because like it really dawned on me in these cases, like a lot of these people, they don't really meet like get the chance to meet people from like an organization like DSA, once again, largest socialist organization in the United States. A lot of times people they're engaging with are from like smaller movements, right? Like people from PSL or back in the day from like WWP or something like that, right? Not throwing shade to any of these organizations, but once again, just the nature of the people that they typically engage with as opposed to engaging with a group like DSA. But I'm starting to ramble. So going back to the question, once again, the itinerary was amazing. Like the first week we met with, once again, at the Congreso, there were different workshops where you would engage with different people from your region. Like there was a North America breakout where like people from the United States would meet other people from Canada, other people from the United States, right? PSL had a delegation there. There was another group from the United States known as the IPA, right? The International People's Assembly. Really cool group of people. They essentially have like local affiliates throughout the country. For example, North Carolina, Raise Up for 15, they had a delegation with the IPA. There were tenant unions organizers from LA who also had a delegation with the IPA. Really interesting people. But to me,
there was like a number of American organizations down there.
Yeah, surprisingly enough, yes. The three big ones were us, PSL, and IPA. And through IPA, since they're like an umbrella group, they had a bunch of different like local groups basically there to like send a representative, right? But to
sure
me,
that you were doing a lot of networking internationally. Did you also take the opportunity to network on the national level with all of the American groups there?
Absolutely. At least I tried to, right? Everybody tried to, I suppose. Like it was like Gloria Riva was there from PSL, right? It was interesting to meet her, I suppose, right? Interesting to meet once again the different PSL comrades that were there. And the
claim to
IPA
fame is my claim to fame will always be that Gloria Riva said that I'm too online to one of my comrades.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Yeah, that's
yeah. We had dinner together. She didn't like the shirt I was wearing, I guess.
That's incredible. Yeah, Gloria Riva was definitely there, which was interesting. I really like the IPA people. Once again, because they were from like different local groups, like from across the United States. It's actually the IPA. So I mentioned earlier the Institute of Simon Bolivar, which was the group in Venezuela that we were working with to put this together. There was also a group domestically in the United States that also helped facilitate this, and they're affiliated with the IPA. It's called the People's Forum, People's Forum NYC. They're based in New York City. Vijay Prashad does a lot of work with them. It's specifically Manolo de los Santos, who's an amazing comrade, right, up in People's Forum, who really was a big part of helping us put this together. So they were really cool people as well. But once again, for me, when I think about the itinerary, truly the most remarkable, amazing thing to experience was what we were able to do during week 2, which was after the Congreso had ended, right? And once again, this was the celebration of Venezuelan independence. Oh my goodness, this is beautiful. We love it, blah, blah, blah. There's some interesting plenary speakers, right? After that was done, most of the delegates went home, right? It was only DSA, because we were working directly with the Institute of Simon Bolivar, that was invited to stay for a second week. And specifically because we asked them, we said, hey, this is the first time DSA is sending a delegation to Venezuela. Obviously, we're happy to be a part of this Congreso, but if it's possible, we want to engage with average everyday Venezuelans. We want to engage with the people in the communes struggling to build socialism, right? And they were like, of course, we would love to help facilitate that. So week 2 was spent visiting these communes, right? These different communes in Venezuela, which honestly, I lost count of how many different communes we visited with, which I guess I should maybe lay a little bit of groundwork here. The communes, what the hell are they, right? That commune, that could mean anything, right? Well, the communes in Venezuela, very interesting history. For the first 10 years, I guess I would say, of the quote unquote Bolivarian revolution, right? When Chavez was in power, right? The communes weren't really a thing in Venezuela. This a lot of time spent by the movement at the time was spent fighting a lot of the right-wing forces that had been entrenched in the Venezuelan bureaucracy and had controlled Venezuela for so long, right? The 2002 coup against Chavez, right? The oil lockouts that happened thereafter, the 2004 recall against Chavez, right? That first 10 years, a lot of that was spent struggling against the entrenched forces of the right. It wasn't until Chavez's last years, and specifically his epic final speech known as El Golpe de Timon, right? The strike at the helm speech, where he says something to the effect of, we're trying to, here's the thing, Venezuela is still a capitalist society, but we're trying to build towards socialism. We're trying to transition towards socialism. So where is the commune, right? Where is that basic building block of society that gives workers the ability to truly own the means of their production, right? True socialism, right? Where is the commune? Why have we struggled so hard to build that, right? And then, we looked at all these bureaucrats and was like, what the hell is going on here? What are the issues? It hasn't been until Chavez passed away, and in the last 10 years, that the communes have really begun to blossom, because in part due to that final speech by Chavez saying, well, what the hell, where's the people power, right? So here's an example. Probably the most famous one of these communes is known as El Maizal, right? And El Maizal is a massive, basically like corn farm in the state of Portuguesa, which is in the western part of Venezuela, right? It's this massive area of land that is worked in common by all the people that work there, right? Everybody that works there votes on every decision they make, right? All the money they get from the corn that they sell is held in common in a communal bank, right? And El Maizal is critically important for a couple different reasons. One, corn in general is very important to the Venezuelan diet, just like many Latin American countries. And two, as sanction and blockade have affected the Venezuelan economy and the decline in the price of oil after the U.S. and other countries flooded the market, right? Because of that, self-sufficiency and homegrown like food cultivation is critically important. So communes like El Maizal, once again, are a very good example of what the hell the communes are. But once again, we visited so many different communes in Caracas. We went to the countryside, as I mentioned, which was in the eastern part of the country. We went to the state of Anzoátegui, which was very interesting, right? We met with so many different rural communes, right? We met with communes that I had never even heard of, right? It was amazing. And there's a couple different big takeaways that I want to drive home, which is that almost to a T, almost every single one of these communes was led by strong women, 100%. It was remarkable. Almost all of these communes had like women's health centers, like physical therapy for pregnant women, things like that. They had like abuse, help centers and things like that. It was remarkable to me. And what I came to truly learn that I did not know before I went there, right? And I consider myself somebody who's like read a bunch of books about Venezuela, right? I thought of these communes as like places that specialize in certain things, right? Like El Maizal, they do the corn, right? What I learned is that a lot of these communes, they do everything. And the reason they do everything is because, once again, the state has been so crippled by foreign intervention by foreign, aggression from the United States and, the West or the North, whatever you want to call it, right? And because of that, these communes, they make their own food. They make their own clothes. They have health clinics for themselves. Once again, they have communal banks where they hold all the money they raise from the things they sell in common, and they vote on all their decisions. And these communes encompass thousands of people as well, thousands of people. They even talk to us how like a couple different communes that are adjacent to each other, we're talking about building a communal city, right? So like, I hate to get super dramatic, but like, it was hard to not look at this and be like, wow, this is like witnessing people really like building socialism in like real time. Like, these are workers literally owning the means of their production. It's remarkable. And once again, like, we can get a little bit deeper into like the complexities of these different communes, because they do, occasionally like clash with the state and like the bureaucracy on, different issues for different reasons, but that's a whole different topic. But yeah, as far as the itinerary,
that is all absolutely incredible. Actually, if we could zoom in for a second, I'd love to ask you, if you just were to pick one person that really stuck out to you during your time in Venezuela, who would that be? Just tell us a little bit about them, about their life, about the time that you spent with them.
Absolutely. Oh gosh. let me think. This is, oh man, there's so many really good people I met. I suppose this is one that I won't use because I had a lot of good interactions with this guy in particular. So we had different attaches working with us, right? People that were with us as like a translator to make sure we knew what we were doing in the Venezuelan countryside, right? In particular, I would be absolutely remiss without shouting out a man by the name of Abril Vizcaya, right? This dude was a sweetheart. Oh my goodness. And not just that, he was very open and honest about everything, right? Anybody who tries to like detract about Venezuela or whatever tries to be like, oh my gosh, this authoritarian dictatorship, oh my, dear leader, whatever, right? Everybody had a very nuanced perspective of the government, a very nuanced perspective of what they were going through, right? And Abril, once again, very honest, despite being somebody that was essentially like a government liaison, right? Abril told me, he was like, yeah, I would ask him, I would be like, so like how did you get involved with like the Suve and like the party and everything? Like, how does that even like, what is it like just to like be a member of the party in Venezuela? How does one get involved? How does one engage? Like just simple, like practical, like from average person to average person, like what is it like, right? And once again, Abril was very honest in that, like, oh yes, my family, they were militants, right? My father was a member of the Communist Party back during like the 1980s. And it was these movements that came together to build what became the Fifth Republic movement in the late 90s, right? Which, Chavez led. And it was these movements of the left that had been underground in some cases for so long that finally like had a piece of the government, had a piece of power, right? When Chavez got elected. And once again, Abril was, once again, he grew up with the revolution, right? He's been a militant for his whole life because of it, right? And once again, he was very honest about, maybe mistakes that the government has made in the past, right? It was very interesting to engage with them on some issues that maybe people in the United States are more progressive on than people in Venezuela are, right? We talked a little bit about weed legalization, right? And I asked him, I was like, so like, what is the party's stance on like drugs and stuff like that? Just out of my own curiosity. And Abril told me, he was like, yeah, it's a generational thing, right? There are older militants in the party in Pasuve that are very much anti-drugs, anti-legalization, stuff like that. But it's the youth in the party, the younger people in the party that are much more open-minded toward these sorts of things. And very much so, that was also the case with.
I imagine that a lot of that would have to. You have to consider the historical context of, how the narco states have terrorized Latin America.
Abso-freaking-lutely. Yeah, wonderful point, especially a country like Venezuela, which is literally right next to Colombia, right? Where the narco paramilitaries run rampant. In fact, they attack and threaten people on the Venezuelan border all the time. So that's definitely a thing as well. But once again, this is just this is just an example. This is a microcosm of like so many of the beautiful, beautiful people that I've met, and every single one of them, right, had a very nuanced view of their government. And that once again, they would say Venezuela is still a capitalist society, right? And it's one that we are trying to build towards socialism, right? And that project is sometimes difficult. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's not even linear, right? But because the government continues to support the commune projects and continues to support the people in building those communes, they stay loyal to the party, right? To Pasuve and to the government. Now, that's not to say that there aren't good principled leftists within some aspects of the opposition. There absolutely are. But once again, what was remarkable to me, what was truly remarkable to me, not once in the whole 2 weeks that I was in Venezuela, did I ever hear or even see anything referencing Juan Guaido? Total afterthought in Venezuela. Total afterthought in Venezuela. Even to the right wing, nobody cares about him. I would see graffiti referencing some of the other right-wing figures like Enrique Capriles or Leopoldo Lopez. Juan Guaido, literally nothing. So like, it's just once again, it's just amazing. Yeah. And it's amazing how the United States can get almost more than half the world in saying, okay, yeah, this guy's actually a legitimate president of Venezuela, who Venezuelans don't even know who the who the hell he is, right? So once again, that was definitely amazing to me, and to me that was the most rewarding and beautiful thing to do was engage with average Venezuelan people. Because to me, when you engage with average people in Venezuela, or even when I was in Peru doing that too, you just learn how similar we all are, right? You learn how similar we all are, and it's just a beautiful thing to to combat alienation, knowing that, hey, we're not alone in this struggle. Even in the United States, across the world, we've got friends
Absolutely.
everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I did want to ask, did you talk to people about the sanctions a lot? Did there's, I don't know, whenever I think about Venezuela, I just imagine a pall over the country because of the sanctions regime and the hardships that they suffer because of that, in addition to the constant class war against the bourgeoisie. But I'd love to know how the people of Venezuela perceive the sanctions and maybe what you learned about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What was remarkable to me as well being in Venezuela is the level of political education in the country, right? It's impossible. Like the graffiti everywhere. And once again, this isn't graffiti made by the government or whatever, or the party. This is graffiti made by the same people that would make graffiti in this country, right? By people who are, poor, or people who live in the streets and shit like that, right? The graffiti everywhere was of a political nature, everywhere. Graffiti of Bolivar, graffiti of Chavez, graffiti of Maduro, graffiti of whatever, right? This is a country that is deeply politicized, in the sense that it doesn't matter who you talk to, it doesn't matter who you're having a conversation with. They are going to have a very nuanced political perspective. And almost every single one of them was very, very knowledgeable about the sanctions and their situation due to the sanctions and the effects of those sanctions, right? And how it had an effect on the economy, and how it was devastating, how it is devastating for the communes to even be able to do the very little that they can, right, in providing for themselves. I'll use a couple of different concrete real examples here. One of the interesting places, because week 2, when we were in the countryside, it was mostly spent visiting communes. It wasn't only spent visiting communes. We also engaged with factories, and we went to one of the oil refineries at one point. We went to one of the universities, right? One of the factories we went to, known as the Factory of Factories, was a factory that was built before the economy crashed, specifically focused toward transitioning to more renewable energies. After the economy crashed and that became basically impossible, it is now, once again, it's the Factory of Factories. What they do is they try to manufacture parts for other factories to use, only because it's so difficult for them to get parts imported for different machinery abroad because of things like the sanctions.
Yo, dog, I heard you like machinery, so I made you some machinery that can make machinery.
Literally, it's amazing. They have these giant machines that would smelt objects. I don't even know. It's amazing. But anyways, so I use this example because once again, and this is particularly relevant, I would argue, because of what's happening with Cuba right now, right? Biden recently announced, oh, we're going to do targeted sanctions on Cuban government officials that, oh, these aren't going to hurt the people. We're going after the bad guys, right? Targeted sanctions is the most bullshit phrase ever invented, right? And here's an example of it.
Precision bombing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In the Factory of Factories, the manager, or the floor leader, whatever, said to us, he was like, yeah, well, here's how they affect us, right? People say targeted sanctions don't matter. Well, what happens is the owner of the factory, or whatever government bureaucrat oversees the factory, that person will get sanctioned directly. And when that person gets sanctioned directly, that tells companies overseas, and whether they're in Germany or even China sometimes, that, okay, this person's sanctioned, I'm not dealing with his business or his company. And because they don't do that, that then has a trickle-down effect for the whole economy, right? Now the factory itself, which employs thousands of people, cannot actually do any business. And those people can't even work or feed themselves, right? So once again, targeted sanctions, total bullshit. Another thing that I would mention regarding sanctions and engaging with people on the sanctions, we had a really good, on the last day, after we were in the countryside, we went back to Caracas. On the last day we were in Caracas, we had a really good conversation, nice, robust conversation with a man by the name of Carlos Ron. Carlos Ron, I believe his official title is the Minister for North America, right? And who Carlos is, interestingly enough, he's a former member of the Venezuelan diaspora. He's literally from New Jersey and acts like a New Jersey guy. It's hilarious, right? But he is in Caracas and works for the government. For example, if the Venezuelan embassy in DC was opened, Carlos is the one who'd be like staffing the embassy and overseeing it. But because it's closed, he lives in Caracas. Anyways, so Carlos, we're talking with Carlos. He speaks obviously fluent English, dude from New Jersey, engaging, whatever. He says to us, he's like, I forget who asks him, but like somebody says, when was there ever a time like was there a time where when was it at its worst, right? And what was that like? And how are you guys able to get out of that, right? And Carlos said a couple things. He said one, and this was very apparent to me and everybody in the delegation, right? Because you hear a lot of crazy shit about Venezuela. He said one, we've gotten to a place in Venezuela where we know how to survive. We know how to get by with the sanctions. We can feed ourselves. Things are beginning to trend upward and things are beginning to get better, right? And once again, speaking from my perspective, it was very clear that this was the case, right? It's not to say Venezuela doesn't have problems. Of course it does, right? It's not to say the government does have problems. It's a government, right? Governments do things, right? So once again, it was very readily apparent to us that things were in an upward trajectory, which thank God, right? Essentially, for any of my Latin American history nerds here, Venezuela basically went through a 5-year special period, right? Like Cuba did during the 90s, where they had to redo everything, redo their entire economy, right? That's essentially what Venezuela has gone through in the last 5 years. And Carlos said to us, as far as like when things were like at their worst or whatever, he said the blackouts, right? Some of you recall after Juan Guaido was, he's actually the president, blah, blah, blah. The United States, right? Through like cyber attacking the electrical grid in Venezuela, manufactured a bunch of rolling blackouts. And Caracas was blacked out again and again, week after week, blacked out, and things were really bad. And Carlos said to us, at one point, there was a moment where things were blacked out for 5 straight days. And what's interesting about Caracas, and this I didn't even know like until I got there, right? Caracas is situated in a valley at like the most northernmost point of where the Andes kind of like stretch up over Venezuela. It's in a valley, like right off, not directly off the coast, but between like after you hit the coast, there's a little bit of mountains, and then there's Caracas, settled in a valley, but it's still somewhat high up in relation to the places around them. Because of that, water has to get pumped up to Caracas for people to be able to drink. With blackouts, you can't pump the water up. So not only were there blackouts, and it's incredibly hot, right? It's Venezuela. People didn't have access to water. So Carlos said how it was in those moments where like things were getting to a point where like whether you were supportive of the government or not, you had to live, right? And that's the most devastating aspect of these sanctions, right? Is that it's literally, okay, let's just make life so miserable for everybody that they have no choice but to overthrow their government. Anybody who doesn't think these are acts of war is very mistaken, right? These are absolutely acts of war. And to me, one of my biggest takeaways coming back here to the United States is we have so much work to do to help these people, right? I don't want to shamelessly like plug the convention stuff right now, but I feel like this seems like a decent enough opportunity. I co-authored a resolution 14, which is going to be on the consent agenda, so it's not even going to get debated anyway, probably. But in that resolution, once again, it's about doing more things like this within the International Committee. And I'm optimistic. I really hope that we can begin to do like national anti-sanctions campaigns, right? National anti-war campaigns, things like that. We've got to do, in my opinion, not just DSA, but just the left of the United States, we've got to do a better job of pushing that message, right? When I see Joe Biden do these sanctions on Cuba, what that tells me is that Joe Biden and the Democratic administration, they think they have nothing to fear. They think, we can do whatever we want to Cuba and the rest of the world. Literally nobody's going to say anything or even try and stop us, right? So once again, to me, like I see at least from my level on the NPC, right, I see a lot of the amazing work that some of the different working groups were able to do on the PROACT campaign, right, which is a whole thing in and of itself. And I wonder to myself, why can't we replicate some sort of similar model and do something like that for a national anti-war campaign, right? That's my dream, but that's, once again, now I'm getting.
No, you're absolutely right. The anti-war movement on the left hasn't been robust as it needs to be for about 15 years now. We've lost a lot of, since the Iraq War, lost a lot of the steam behind that, and we need to take it seriously again, because the way to promote socialism throughout the world is to stop the U.S. from stalling socialism wherever it appears. But I did want to just ask you really quickly about, I don't want to give the anti-chavistas in the West too much oxygen, so I'll just say, why do you personally advocate for solidarity with Venezuela? You said a lot about the sanctions. You said a lot about the communes. If you just sum it up in three sentences, why is it that the West should really care about supporting Venezuela? Socialists in the West, rather.
Absolutely. Let me do my best to do this in 3 sentences. And it's kind of like what you just said. One, it's incumbent upon us in the left, in the United States, to recognize that the war machine is in our backyard. And because the war machine is in our backyard, it's our responsibility to be protecting these socialist movements across the world, or doing what we can to protect them, right? And number 2, how can we expect, we're socialists, right? Once again, we believe in trial and error, right? Learning about what works and what doesn't work, rather than looking at, socialist countries like Venezuela and saying, oh my God, this particular thing went wrong. Let's throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's learn from them, right? How about that? Let's learn from their successes and their failures, right? These are countries that have actually these are socialist movements that have actually gotten into power. That's sure a lot more than we've ever managed to do in the United States, right? Let's learn from them, right? And I despise, third point here, I suppose, or third sentence, I despise this tendency on the left to, and I don't know, maybe I'm being petty here, but I'm just going to say it. I despise this tendency on some parts of the left.
This is a very petty room right now, so please.
Well, there we go. Exactly. I'm among friends here, right? So I despise this tendency among certain parts of the left to look at socialist movements when they're currently existing and trash them because of how difficult it is to actually build socialism. And only 30 years after the fact, when they've been dead and gone, then you'll see, oh my God, wasn't Allende so cool? Oh my God, I love Allende. Even
conveniently the exact amount of time it takes for the CIA to declassify their papers.
Exactly, God damn it. But yeah, those are a couple of the reasons why I think it's important for us to be in solidarity with socialists across the world. We have so much to learn from them, when we have a responsibility here in the United States to be doing what we can to fight the war machine.
I really love that point that you made just now about the how it's actually difficult to do things in the real world, because a lot of these people uphold movements that never really took off, that only lasted 3 to 5 years, and didn't actually have to deal with the problems of establishing a stable society that actually provided for its citizens and defended itself from outside threats, and then was able to establish economic growth. And they look at all these compromises that they had to make and say, well, they compromised on their ideals, so that means that their ideals were worthless. It's like, no, your ideals are worthless because you have never actually operated those ideals on the real world. So let's that's the petty point I'm going to make. So if we could move on to Peru really quickly, maybe just fast forward us through the rest of the itinerary in Venezuela, and then get us to Peru. That would be really great.
Sure. So I suppose the last noteworthy item that I should mention when it comes to Venezuela is we meet with Nicolas Maduro, right? And that did cause quite a stir on Twitter, I suppose. In fact, not only on Twitter, some of you may have seen the chair of the Republican Party, Ronna McDaniel, put out a tweet denouncing us because of this. Elliot Abrams, right, the Trump envoy or whatever to Venezuela, also, he wrote a whole fucking blog about how DSA is evil for meeting with Maduro. I personally think it's hilarious that we pissed off Ronna McDaniel and Elliot Abrams, and I think that's good. Now, as far as the actual meeting with Maduro itself, it happened on the second to last day to Caracas, right? And it was, I suppose, impromptu, even though I knew this was probably something that was going to happen at some point. We had a meeting within the delegation before we met with Maduro to decide, is this something we want to do? Do we think this is a good idea, right? I, of course, was in favor, right? But maybe there were other members of the delegation that were a little bit more cautious. What I said to the delegation is what I'll say right now to you all here, which is, to me, I'm not looking at this delegation or even DSA in particular to be the red flag of socialism, right? I'm not looking for us to put out a statement saying, oh my God, we love our dear comrade Maduro. What I look at us here is we're on a project of normalization. And if we turn down a meeting with the president, what the hell kind of message does that send, right? Oh my God, no, we can't meet with him. This is some scary, no. Treat him like a normal person, right? Treat this like a normal meeting and be respectful, right? I don't have it with me, unfortunately. He gave us all a copy. Yeah, exactly. We hate Elliot Abrams. All my homies hate Elliot Abrams. But Nicolas Maduro gave us all a copy of his favorite Simon Bolivar biography. Very sweet, right? That was pretty cool. I will literally treasure it to my dying day because I'm a nerd. But no, the meeting with Majoro was very interesting, and once again, it was pretty. The most hilarious anecdote I put out on Twitter, just because I can't help myself, and I'll say it again here. We asks everybody, where we're from or whatever. I tell him, I'm like, oh, I'm from Richmond, Virginia, and he goes to me, Virginia, and he says to me, obviously in Spanish, he goes, is that where the CIA is? And because I'm super starstruck. I'm super starstruck at this point. I'm like responding to him in earnest, right? Like it's a serious question. And I say to him, oh, no, that's actually an hour north of me, right? Because the CIA is in Maryland. They're on the other side of DC.
Wow.
And he says to me, he goes, okay. Well, when you go back, tell them I said hi. And at this point, my brain just explodes. Like my brain is melting. I'm just like, oh my God, this is the most incredible thing that's ever happened. He literally just told me to tell the CIA that he says hi. Anyways, I was about to say, I was like, damn.
But did you say hi for him? But did you say hi for him?
I was about to say, I was like, damn, here's the thing. One, no, I have not. And two, what I realized was like, damn, I hope this doesn't put me on like a list somewhere. Probably does, but whatever. I probably passed that point as soon as I entered Cross.
You're a DSA member, so you're already in the CIA, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. You're damn right. This was a secret mission of the CIA to infiltrate his government. Literally, people said that.
Yeah. So, you went from Venezuela. You spent 2 weeks in Venezuela, and
Correct,
moved on
yes.
to Peru from there.
So actually, Peru was first. I was in Peru.
Peru was first. Okay.
Peru was early June. Venezuela was late June. But I'd be happy to talk a little bit about Peru here because that was also an amazing experience. So
Please, would love to hear about it.
I was about to say, well, once again, I will try not to take too long on this one.
I guess let me just ask this one out the bat. So how's the atmosphere in Peru? Y'all were there before the election, but I can't imagine too many people were surprised at Castillo's victory. So I imagine there was a lot of hubbub in the country surrounding all of that.
It was amazing. So, crucial context. We were there as an election observer delegation, right, to observe the elections, as you mentioned. We spent all of our time in Lima, right? Lima is probably doesn't surprise anybody here, is the largest city in Peru, right? I believe off the top of my head, a third of the population of Peru is based in Lima, right? Lima is also a right-wing stronghold, right? Because, Pedro Castillo, much like Evo Morales in Bolivia, a lot of his base is in the rural indigenous parts of Peru. Lima is a stronghold, or I suppose I should say was a stronghold, for Keiko Fujimori, the candidate of the right wing. So the atmosphere we saw was a very polarized one, right? In Lima. It was amazing. The first billboard that I saw when I landed in Lima was 5 days to vote no to communism. And this was because Keiko Fujimori and the right wing ran a campaign purely on fear, purely on Pedro Castillo is a Senderista, shining path, sympathetic. He's a terrorist. Blah, blah, blah. There were literally members of the right-wing opposition saying that we need to execute Pedro Castillo. Like they were literally just saying that sort of shit openly.
Amazing.
So in Lima,
you're lucky polarizing. When I went down to Lima, the first billboard I saw was for a Huawei phone, I believe. So
that sounds
like you were there during a more interesting time.
Yo, that's amazing. So you've been to Lima, so then you have an idea of kind of like the feel of the city, right? Lima is a very interesting city, right? It was what was remarkable though, you mentioned how like Castillo was like the favorite, right? And was initially polling way ahead of Keiko, right? And we felt good, right? We felt confident that we knew it was going to be a tight margin, but we felt confident that Castillo was going to win it the whole time we were there. And it's interesting. I mentioned Lima's, right-wing stronghold. We did our best to engage with average Peruvians, to engage with the average Peruvian population. Any taxi driver we got, we would ask him or them or whoever it was, like saying, hey, there's clearly a super important election on Sunday. What are you thinking, right? And without fail, except for only one person, every single one of them said to us, yeah, I'm supporting Castillo. And we would ask them, we'd be like, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. Well, is there any reason? And their reasoning was simple. Keiko Fujimori is a corrupto, a very corrupt person. She was literally in prison last year, right? Comes from a super corrupt family in Peruvian politics. And Pedro Castillo is once again running a campaign against these corruptos, right? Against the corruption that exists in Peruvian, politics, right? Now, once again, that was the view of people supporting Castillo in Lima. I would like to imagine and I'm, at least from the groups that I was able to engage with from the rural communities that were in Lima, right? For these rural communities, nothing resonated more than his campaign slogan, which, my God, Pedro Castillo's campaign should be a reminder of what can be accomplished when you run a damn good campaign, right? This first, because this dude came out of nowhere, right? This dude with his giant pencil and his cowboy hat, which here we go. I do have my cowboy hat over here that I bought at one of his rallies. You already know your boy had to do it. Amazing. They were selling these bad boys everywhere. But yeah, his
that picture of
cowboy
him is
hat,
incredible.
yes, his cowboy hat, right? But his campaign slogan: "No más pobres en un país rico," right? No more poor people in a rich country. Simple, devastating, right? Peru has such large natural resources. How is there so many poor people, right? Especially poor indigenous people in the rural communities, right? That message resonated, right? So even though it was a polarizing atmosphere in Lima, at least, you could feel that people felt that change was coming and that Castillo was that change. So it was remarkable.
Absolutely. In the words of Yellow Parenti, the third world is not underdeveloped; it is overexploited.
Yes.
There are very few poor countries in this world. So since y'all left, Castillo actually won, but the opposition party now holds the Congress. I don't want to treat you like a expert on Peruvian politics, but if you have any opinions on how that's going to impact the movement, I would love to hear them.
Sure. I may not be Peruvian, but I am a huge nerd. So yeah, I do have some opinions here and some takes, right? So here's what I would say. And we asked this. So when we were in Peru, we didn't just meet with average people. We met with a lot of different political parties. We met with a lot of labor unions, right? We met with a lot of different people in Peru, a lot of people that were supporting Castillo. And they would tell us, right, they were concerned about the sabotage from the Congress, right? Some of you may have seen when Keiko Fujimori and the right wing were trying to claim fraud and, oh my God, Pedro Castillo stole this. You might have seen, conspicuously enough, what did the OAS say? The OAS said, nah, this was actually a clean election. They didn't back Keiko Fujimori. Is that because they did it out of the goodness of their hearts? No, right? I would argue there's a couple different reasons they did that. One, because it was a clean election, right? We observed it. We didn't see any.
They tried it with Bolivia already. They tried it with Venezuela already. The CIA gets, they mix it up every now and again.
Exactly. They burned
the OAS, for those of you, for those listening who don't know, the OAS is the Organization of American States and is well known for being a U.S. dominated, State Department dominated organization of Latin American states who are, well, maybe you could explain it a little bit better than I could.
I was about to say, Fidel Castro has a great quote about this. He says it perfectly. The Organization of American States is the U.S. Department of the Colonies. That's what the OAS is, right?
Ouch.
Literally, yeah, got him, right? So, like, yeah. So it's true, though. So once again, like you mentioned, the OAS also burned a ton of political capital by what they did in Bolivia. And I think another thing is that some of the right wingers in the region are banking on the Congress, right? In Peru, you mentioned the Congress is right wing. Not just that, the Congress has a lot of political power in Peru. One of the things that led to Pedro Castillo gaining power was massive protest movements in Peru over the way the Congress impeached the last president of Peru, right, who was certainly no saint himself. But once again, there was a lot of struggles between the legislature and the executive, right? So Pedro Castillo is going to be dealing with a very hostile atmosphere almost no matter what. His political party, Peru Libre, they were a regional political party, which is now on the scene, a Marxist-Leninist political party, which that's just mind-blowing to think about in and of itself. Yeah, exactly. A Marxist-Leninist party in power in Peru, that's just mind-blowing of a sentence. But fundamentally, what gives me optimism, or let me phrase it this way, I don't think Castillo's shit out of luck, right? As far as like, oh God, the Congress is against you, you're fucked, right? His central campaign promise is what will be make or break for his presidency. His central campaign promise being, we are going to write a new constitution made by and for Peruvians, right? Just look at what Chile is doing right now. They are shredding Pinochet's constitution as we speak. Pedro Castillo is saying, guess what? Let's do the same. Let's shred the Fujimori constitution. That is
you cannot simply lay hands on the ready-made state machinery. You must dismantle it and build your own.
Exactly. And that's the Chavez model, right? Chavez took power. We're going to shred the Constitution, write a new one, and that's what happened. If Castillo can push forward on that promise, and all the political parties and unions we met with were firmly behind him on that, That's what they want, a new constitution. Castillo himself has even wavered sometimes in his rhetoric, right? Being like, oh yeah, a little bit wishy-washy. One thing that he's not wishy-washy on, new constitution. That's what's critical. Write a new goddamn constitution, and then you'll really be able to see a political revolution, so to speak, happen in Peru. Because if that doesn't happen, and if they're unable to make that happen, the Congress absolutely will sabotage him or do their best to sabotage him. So that's the concern. New constitution. That's my answer to that. He has to deliver on that if he wants to fight the Congress.
Awesome. Well, Ciel, we're down there to God, how do you know so much about Peru? And never mind. Y'all were down there to observe the election. How did y'all decide to do an election observing in the first place?
Absolutely. Big critical question. And I will also shamelessly plug Resolution 14 again that I co-authored for the convention, which is going to be on the consent agenda. So I'm optimistic it'll pass.
How are we voting on that one, Mina?
There we go. There we go. We love it.
That would be a yes vote.
I was just saying, and I should be completely honest, if anybody here does have questions about that resolution or any convention-related stuff in general, feel free to hit me up whenever. I'm always happy to talk. But anyways, so one of the provisions within that resolution is empowering the International Committee to send election observer delegations more often, right, more regularly. That's one of the reasons we did this one in Peru, to show that not only we can, right, that DSA has the capability to do this, but that we should, that there's actual value in this, right? So a little bit more concrete background. The presidential election in Ecuador happened in early April, right? And I remember looking at this election and being like, wow, why weren't we able to send a delegation? It would have been so cool if we could have sent a delegation here, right? The left was really struggling in Ecuador. Ultimately, they lost. So like, damn, I was thinking, fuck, man, like maybe we could have like helped them somehow. And simultaneously, that same day in Ecuador was the first round of Peru's presidential election. DSA has had historical links with a political party in Peru known as Nuevo Peru. In fact, they attended our convention in 2019. They're like a democratic socialist, like progressive feminist party, really good people. Their candidate, Veronica Mendoza, was the candidate that we were backing, but she lost. What shocked everybody was what we've described, that this runoff in Peru came down to Pedro Castillo from the left, literally a Marxist-Leninist political party, and Keiko Fujimori, literally a neo-fascist whose dad was, dictator in the 90s, and she's like homies with Bolsonaro and all that. So as soon as I saw that and some of the other leadership in the international committee, we were like, holy shit. Like, Peru is one of the largest economies in the world. This is just a critically important country for the world, and as a big U.S. ally historically. We're in a situation where they might have a former teachers union leader who carries a giant pencil around talking about we're going to nationalize resources as president. This is critically important for the region, right? In fact, you saw this response from basically every political party in the region, right? Before the election, a lot of people in Venezuela and Bolivia, Evo, Maduro, were voicing support for Vero Mendoza. But as soon as Castillo won, basically everybody went, holy shit, we need to reach out to this guy and like establish like links and see if he's legit or what's the situation here. So, I talked with Blanca Estevez, well, once again, shout out here about the idea of maybe we can send a delegation to Peru, right? There's a quick turnaround here, right? The runoff's in like 2 months, but it's super important, right? We reached out to our allies on the ground, Nuevo Peru, as I mentioned earlier, and we said to them, hey, how can we help you guys? How can we raise awareness to what's going on in Peru and get a sense of the situation? Because this election is obviously going to be important. And they said to us, send people down here to observe this election. We will welcome you. We will host you. We can show you around. We can get you connected with Peru Libre and Pedro Castillo's people. And once again, it's so important for people in the United States to be able to send information back to people in the United States about what's really happening. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, okay, it's done. We're doing this. We have to do this. I reached out to people within the Progressive International who do election observing routinely. And I said to them, so in DSA, we're considering do this, but we've never done this before. Like, can you help us? Like, how does one observe an election? Like, do you just show up to the polls? Like, what do you do? And the Progressive International, very kind, good allies of ours, they walked us through the process. We applied for accreditation. That's the whole thing in and of itself. But we were able to work directly with the PI as well as the Party of the European Left, who also sent a delegation, and another group known as
You said the PI?
Yes, There were 3 other electoral observer delegations that we coordinated with to make this happen. The Progressive International, which is like an international, like progressive, it's literally what a international progressive institution. The Party of the European Left, which is the grouping of leftist parties within the EU, right, the European Parliament, and Alba Movimientos, which is basically like how would I describe them? Like, I guess the electoral observing arm of ALBA, right? The Bolivarian Alliance, which is like a leftist alliance in South America, or in Latin America, I should say.
So did you make any European connections while you were there?
Absolutely. The European left delegation was a very interesting group of people. There were MEPs from Spain, right, from the United Left in Spain. There were members of European Parliament from the Portuguese left bloc. There were people from the Communist Party of France. There were people from Belgium, and there were people from Slovenia. I should also mention, so when we went to Venezuela, our delegation was composed of like DSA political leaders, so to speak, in that it was members of the NPC and members of the International Committee, right? Because this was like a delegation to learn from the parties down there. Peru, the delegation was different because this was an election observer delegation. We had 2 members of the NPC, which is myself and Abdullah Yunus, and we have 2 DSA elected officials with us. We had Marcela Mitines, a member of the New York State Assembly, and Carlos Ramirez Rosa, a member of the Chicago City Council. And a 5th person we had was a comrade named Juan Zhongcheng, who's a Peruvian DSA member. So somebody who's from Peru, speaks fluent Spanish, right? That can actually help us network with people. But because we had elected officials there with us, like for people like Carlos and Marcela, they were like, wow, this is a great opportunity to like network with MEPs, like I mentioned. And not just that, the PI delegation, the Progressive International delegation, had members of the Ecuadorian National Assembly in there. They had members of the Chilean National Assembly in there, right? Legislators from across the country, which this showed our elected officials, Carlos and Marcelo, like, holy shit, these are extremely worthwhile opportunities. And this is something that the Progressive International told me ahead of time. They said, the election observing is critically important, right? And we'll do that. But what you're going to learn in doing this is that what's the most valuable aspect of this is meeting people, right? This is where, like, quote unquote, nation hoppers bump elbows. It was extremely clear to me that like there's like a crowd here. Like there's a group of people who do this sort of shit regularly. And it's a space where DSA has just been absent, right? Which is embarrassing to me, right? You know, so like, once again, I think it's critically important for us to get active in these spaces. Yeah, exactly. It's critically important for us to get active in these spaces. And to me, the Peru delegation was an amazing success. We met Pedro Castillo, right? Which I tell people, I'm not tall, right? I am 5'7". My man Pedro Castillo, he's like here to me. He's like 5'5". He is, I call him an inspiration to short kings everywhere. He has.
Did he have his big pencil on him?
Oh God, unfortunately he did not. So 2 things. So it's amazing how good this dude is. When we met him, right, we did like a little mini panel gathering thing for all the observer delegations. It's interesting. The panel that we did for the delegations, Castillo and Peru Libre, they only asked 2 people to send representatives to actually speak on the panel. And one of them was DSA. Because once again, it's amazing. When they meet us, they recognize Jesus Christ, the largest socialist organization in the United States. We need to, like, they are just as happy to work with us as we are to work with them. And once again, it makes me sad when I think about how DSA historically has turned its back on these parts of the world. It's very depressing, but it's good to be changing that. Anyways, so yeah, when we did this panel with Pedro Castillo in this closed environment, it's amazing. Super soft-spoken, very, dare I say, like professorial, right, in his speech, right, which was very interesting to hear him speak, like literally in front of us. I might be able to find it. There's a Jacobin piece that Medea Benjamin from Code Pink, who was a part of the observer delegation for the Progressive International, she compiled from, okay, maybe I can't find it. She compiled, Google it, I guess. Yeah, she created a Jacobin piece out of the speech that Pedro Castillo gave our delegations. Maybe this is here. Okay, yeah, here it is. I am going to link it right here because it's really interesting. And this is for anybody who wants to know, like, well, what the hell did he even say to you guys? This is what he said to us. Pedro Castillo himself, like, he told us about where he comes from. So many amazing things. Once again, I encourage people to read that piece. Interesting contrast, you know, you mentioned the giant pencil, right? I think it was the day before that, before we met him, we got to attend one of his rallies. Holy shit. I don't know if I've ever been to a more like inspiring rally than that. That dude knows how to put on a freaking rally. Like seeing this dude on his balcony waving his pencil, shouting, "Oh, no más pobre!" Oh my
The
goodness.
man knows what a brand is.
Yes, I'm telling you. I've been telling people. For me, Pedro Castillo is a reminder to leftists everywhere of the power of gimmicks. You got to give average people something to bite into, right? Give average people something to sympathize with. To be like,
What's going
hell
on
yeah,
with this? What's going on with this guy with the pencil? Oh, he wants to give us land. Okay, yeah, I'll vote for him.
exactly. And the image of the pencil itself, education for all, right? Simple message, right? Very easy to understand, right? Nothing weird or complex. Nothing, like I said, he can be professorial because he is a former teachers union leader, but he knows when he's speaking to the people to speak to the people, right? And not speak, super professorial. It was amazing to see the contrast in the dichotomy once again as well, he did a rally, right, where he was spewing fire and brimstone, right? But also meeting him in a more intimate environment where he was very, very chill, very, nice, very, sweet guy or whatever. And once again, it's just amazing that he's going to be president. Like, I still can't, my brain is just like, wow,
It's
Godspeed.
absolutely flabbergasting.
Yes.
So, we talked a lot about we talked a lot about your experience on this trip. I'm wondering, how it's impacted the way that you view the work that you do in your own community, and secondarily, are you how hopeful you are for the U.S.
Two big things here. I think there are huge takeaways from these trips that I would love everybody in DSA to know as far as how I think about relating to my community, as you ask, and just relating to the broader movement. The first is what we discussed earlier with Venezuela, right? That is to say, a need for a strong anti-war movement, the need for a movement here in the United States to be helping our comrades down there, right? To be vociferously opposing any sort of new sanctions toward Cuba, Venezuela, or anywhere, right? No sanctions anywhere, right? No unilateral coercive measures is what we call it, right? These measures that the United States just imposes upon countries. But once again, we talked a little bit about that already. The second thing, the one thing that I might even be more important, I would argue, for people at DSA is that, I see a lot of conversation in DSA all the time, and not just in DSA, but like in the left, about how do we get to a place where we have, a mass workers' party, so to speak, right? How do we get to a place where we don't have dependency on the Democratic Party or on the two-party system or whatever? And to me, one of the biggest takeaways I get from Latin America is that these parties, once again, these parties, these movements they've been able to build, they're backed in direct links and connections to their communities, in direct links to their social movements, right? They don't just have big mass socialist parties, right? They have movements there that can hold these parties accountable and can hold these parties connected to the grassroots. I think a good example here is Bolivia, right? Now, I didn't go to Bolivia, but once again, it's all, interrelated and interconnected. In Bolivia, I look at the 2019 coup, right? If MAS and Evo weren't connected to a strong militant Bolivian union movement, or weren't connected to strong indigenous social movements, that coup very likely would have succeeded, right? But because they had deep links in the labor unions, and because they had deep links in the indigenous social movements, and just different, student movements and things of that nature within Bolivian society, the people came back organized and strong enough to beat back the coup regime, right? On the opposite end of that, I look at Ecuador. I look at what happened in Ecuador earlier this year and how the left lost power, right? And I look at a left that was not able to embed itself within the social movements in Ecuador, particularly within the indigenous communities, right? I look at a movement where there's been rifts between different aspects of the indigenous movements, different aspects of the social movements, right? And that's a problem. I look at Pedro Castillo, getting to this central example here, right? This is somebody who came from the teachers' unions, right? Somebody who came from the union movement. This is somebody who was embedded in his community, right? He's also a former member of the Ronderos, right? Which are former campesino self-defense units that patrol the rural communities, protecting them because the state doesn't, right? This is a dude who is deeply embedded in his community. And not just that, this is another critical lesson. Last year, there were mass protests in the United States right after the killing of George Floyd. Not just that, there were protests across the world in various countries regarding bad pandemic response, things like that. Here in the United States, I look at those protests and think that the left did not do at all a good job of embedding itself with the people. It did not do a good job of once again trying to tap into the anger of the people and try to direct it, so to speak. When I look at Pedro Castillo, I look at an example of somebody who was able to do just that, right? I look at the massive protests that happened in Peru last year, and I look at Pedro Castillo as being able to become the face of that, of being able to transition that into an actual political movement that is now about to take power on a mandate to write a new constitution, which is shocking for a country like Peru, right? Like
It's
Peru,
enormous.
exactly. Like the right-wing alliance in Latin America is called the Lima Group. It's literally capitaled in Lima. So like to see Peru go to somebody who's like, once again, Pedro Castillo, I think, is a complex man in and of himself, but he comes from a political party that is openly Marxist-Leninist. That's a shocking development, right? It's funny when going back to Venezuela briefly here, when we met with Maduro was literally the same moment when the director of the CIA was meeting with Bolsonaro. And Maduro even mentioned it. He was like, Mr. Burns, he calls him Mr. Burns. Mr. Burns is here, he's here in South America, and they're trying to, make attempts on my life, things like that. It was later revealed that they were literally planning to try to assassinate Maduro somehow, but that's, par for the course, right?
I'm
so like,
appalled.
yeah, it's awful, right? So I look at that and I see, okay, the State Department, whatever we want to call it, the military industrial complex, the war machine, they look at Peru, they look at what's happening in Chile right now, right? They look at the polls in Brazil, and they have got to be thinking, holy shit. Yeah, like for The Simpsons. It's amazing, yeah. So, yeah, we all laughed our asses off. He was a funny guy. He was super chill, Maduro. Anyways, so like the Peru, right-wing ally of the United States, gone for all intents and purposes. And once again, we'll see what Castillo's able to do. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be tough, right? It's not over yet. Thank God they didn't coup him before he even took office, for God's sakes, right? So at least that's happened. Chile, they've already started the process of writing a new constitution. Gabriel Boric and the left-wing alliance, which includes the Communist Party, they're still polling really well. I think they have a good shot in November, which, God, I'd love to send an election observer delegation to Chile in November. That's in the works. But anyway, I think there's a chance the left could win Chile, right? Which Chile was the golden child, right? That's the model of, you see, yeah, okay, Pinochet killed a bunch of people, but look how thriving the Chilean economy is. Neoliberalism is so good, isn't it? Well, look at what's happening now in Chile, right? The left is so close to taking power. And of course, the crown jewel, Brazil, right? If Lula can beat Bolsonaro next year, which that's definitely another election we want to send an election observer delegation to, and we're already working with people in Brazil on that. If Lula beats Bolsonaro next year, I mean, talk about return of the pink tide. This is a red wave at that point. Like, that would be earth-shattering. And this is ignoring the presidential elections that are also happening in Colombia next year, which are a whole nother thing. But I'll stop there because I could rant about this forever.
You're right. If we have an entire continent just full of, at the very least, socialist-leaning countries, that would be enormous, especially one with as large an indigenous population, and so close to the U.S., so far from God, as Don Porfirio said. Yeah, I think that you've said a lot of really cogent. You made a lot of really cogent points about how like the left has really failed to seize the moment, especially last year, but just generally. I think Black Red Guard said the other day on Rev Left Radio. He said a lot of these Twitter leftists, they can tell you in detail about international issues half a world away, but they can't tell you about the issues in their own community. And it is really important that we bring our focus down to our neighbors, to our coworkers, to the people that we traffic with every day, and we need to be accountable to them in order to, if we want any hope of them, lending us their power. So, yeah, I do want to ask, what's next for the DSA International Committee? You've talked a lot about election observing in all throughout Latin America. Do you have any other delegations in the works for any other conferences or meeting with any other world leaders? I don't know. What are y'all hoping to do? Short term, long term, blue sky, whatever.
Sure. So this is now the opportunity where I will shamelessly plug everything. Two things, right? Obviously, our national convention is coming up, and our national convention is when we make decisions, right? And these decisions are going to be what affect whatever happens with the international committee, right? There are a bunch of different international resolutions, right? Only one of them made the consent agenda. Oh, praise the Lord. It's the resolution that I co-authored, right? Resolution 14, committing to international socialist solidarity. I encourage everybody to check it out. As I say, I encourage people to vote for it. Once again, it's on the consent agenda. So like, at least in my mind, that means it's basically like safe unless some asshole decides to remove it, which I don't rule that out, but we'll see what happens. It had a wide amount of support. It had over 2/3 support for the consent vote. So that is extremely encouraging to me. That tells me people are happy with the direction the international committee is going and want to build on that, which once again, that's what I want to do, right, with doing things like this. I myself, once again, shameless plug, I also am running for re-election to the NBC as a member of the renewal slate. If anybody's curious about any of that, please reach out. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Third, to answer this question more directly, because it ties into those first two things. If I'm reelected and the other people that co-authored this resolution are reelected, what I can tell you what we and the other people in international committee leadership that we've been talking to are trying to think about doing, and it's exactly what Resolution 14 outlines, which is sending election observer delegations more regularly, but not just that, sending like international brigades abroad regularly. We sent people to Venezuela. I want to send people to Cuba, right? I want to send people to Cuba, and not just that. I want to send people to Cuba regularly, right? And not just Cuba. Why not Vietnam? How awesome would it be to send a delegation to a place like Vietnam? I think that'd be incredible, right? There are so many places across the world.
Go to Laos. We could go to Laos.
That would be amazing.
Try to figure out what exactly Laos is. And
your guess is as good as mine. Asia is not my strong suit. But I know people within our Asia Oceania working group, they've talked to me about like, oh yeah, there's plenty of different people. We could network over there. That would be amazing. In a perfect world, I would love to send a delegation to Palestine, but obviously with BDS, we do not fuck with Israel whatsoever. So that's, the difficult situation in of itself. There are so many places in the world I would love to get to that DSA could send delegations to regularly. And why do I emphasize this word regularly? Because these two delegations we just did, most of it was political leadership, right? Because these were like trial runs. I want to get to a place where we can send rank and file members to a place like Cuba on like a yearly brigade, right? That's so many organizations do shit like that. So many organizations that are far smaller than us do things like that, right? We should
Workers'
be a part.
World Party did that.
Exactly. There's no reason we can't be a part of these May Day brigades, right? Sending a group of DSA members to Cuba or wherever on May Day. That's so doable, right? And to me, that's what I think about when I think of doing brigades regularly. A yearly brigade to like, I don't know, a certain country or whatever. Election observing. To me, there's a couple big ones on the horizon. Chile in November is the most immediate one. I've been talking to various people in Chile about trying to put something together for that. Next year, there's two big ones. Once again, we're here talking about Latin America, so that's, my focus, and that's what I can talk about. Colombia in May. Holy shit. And you talk about countries that are like U.S. lackeys. Colombia is, they call it the Israel of Latin America, right? It's totally financed by the U.S. government for the total purpose of fighting leftists, right? That's basically its entire purpose. The fact that the left has been polling very well in Colombia and might actually challenge for power and at the presidential elections next year is astounding. Now, Colombia is the kind of place that I fully expect them to just rig the election to make sure the left doesn't win, which to me, you know what that tells me? That makes it doubly important. Exactly. That makes it doubly important for people from the United States to go down there and say to the Colombian government, I dare you to fuck with us, right? Because that is the type of thing that will bring the sort of media attention that they don't fucking want, right? So it's extremely important for people from the United States to go to these places, even like Colombia, where the election's probably going to get rigged, and tell people in the United States, there is fraud happening here, right? A place like Brazil, which is also having an election in November, I would love to send a delegation to as well. I think a place like Brazil, the likelihood of like the sort of systemic fraud you will probably see in Colombia is a little bit lower, but the likelihood of the left winning is significantly higher. And having delegates there in Rio or Brasilia or wherever, when, not if, when PT and Lula beat Bolsonaro, oh, that's just, we got to be there. We got to be there for that. We got to be there.
If only to help legitimize the election. That's international solidarity right there. That's proletarian internationalism. That's what I'm talking about.
You're damn right.
That's amazing.
And the last point I will make here, one of the, perhaps the one provision within Resolution 14 that has caused the most debate, right, is that Resolution 14 also directs DSA to apply for membership in what is known as the Sao Paulo Forum, right? What the hell is the Sao Paulo Forum? Well, the Sao Paulo Forum is an alliance of leftist political parties and movements throughout the Americas, right? The Sao Paulo Forum has multiple different political parties in South America and Latin America, and a little bit of interesting history here. The Sao Paulo Forum has previously asked DSA to join, right? It was back in 2015 when DSA was very different, right? And DSA, let me put it lightly, did not join, right? Because of the nature of the foreign policy at the time. I think now we've grown a lot ideologically. We've grown a lot in raw numbers. We've grown a lot. We've matured as an organization, I would argue. I think now is the time to, rather than turn our backs on the rest of the world, to engage with the left and the rest of the world. And I think the first next step is joining the Sao Paulo Forum, right? I was happy when we left the SI in 2017. I happily voted for that, right? But I will say, I think it's left a bit of a void when it comes to being active in the international arena. Let's replace that with something better, right? Let's join the Sao Paulo Forum. I think that would be a beautiful, beautiful thing. And joining the Sao Paulo Forum would give us direct access to be able to network, once again, with leftist political parties throughout the hemisphere. So I think that's another big concrete step that our international committee, I hope, can take. And once again, it's on the consent agenda, so I'm optimistic, but we'll see what happens.
Here's hoping. Here's hoping. So you also had a podcast. Did you want to plug that?
Sure, why not? I'll never waste an opportunity to self-promote, I suppose. So I do have a podcast, Machete y Mate, right? And what it is, it's myself, my brother T, and our good friend Leroy. You know, we're all of Puerto Rican descent. What we do is we cover Latin American politics from a leftist perspective in English, right? And yes, and the reason, one of the biggest reasons we do this is twofold, right? So I mentioned I went to Peru and Venezuela. I also, in late 2019, went to London, right? When, God, that was depressing. Seeing Boris Johnson beat Jeremy Corbyn and being there for it was soul crushing. It was like 2016 Trump all over again. I was like, oh, Jesus, what's happening? But even worse,
get to meet with Corbyn.
I went to one of his rallies. I didn't get to meet him, but I did work with like the Labour Party, but that's a whole nother thing. But anyways,
okay, cool.
So yeah, so one of my biggest takeaways from Corbyn getting smashed by Boris Johnson was just how dominant right-wing media was. Like, it was amazing. Like, being in the United States at the time, I was like, people don't really think he's an anti-Semite, right? That's just media bullshit. It was amazing to me when we would canvass in like parts of London and other parts of England, how many people would say things like, oh yeah, you know, I like Labour, but I don't like Jeremy. He's an anti-Semite. Like, a lot of people actually believe that shit. So like, once again,
I think it was Goebbels who said that if you repeat something enough times, it becomes the truth.
Exactly. So my takeaway from that was, okay, like, we need more left-wing media. We need left-wing media, like, we need more people, you know, putting out messages here. Like, and I thought to myself and my friends, like, what are people not talking about? And we were like, let's do English language coverage of Latin American news from a leftist perspective, because we see many times a disconnect because, you know, in part due to the language barrier, you know, people who can't, you know, truly like contextualize or fully understand some of the things that are happening in Latin America. So we try to cover it from a leftist perspective, just doing like current events rundowns and talking about literally every country. We just did an episode on Cuba and, you know, the protests that have been going on there. So I encourage anybody to check it out. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, thanks so much for doing all that work. I'm definitely enjoying it from what I've listened to. So I guess one last question. Don't want to hold you too long, but so, you know, you went down, you shook hands with Maduro. You know, you observed an election and came out in support of a Marxist-Leninist party. So how does it feel to be a tanky?
I embrace it. I like I say, I am a person that embraces all labels, including tanky. It does not matter to me whatsoever. And it is something that I have been called many a time.
All right, Austin. Well, that's it for my questions. I don't know if you wanted to stick around for a little Q&A with the membership that we have here, if you have the time. Mina, do we have the time?
So formally we're supposed to conclude at 8. I don't know, Austin, if you have time, it's totally fine if you don't, but I definitely don't. I know it's 9 o'clock where you are, correct?
Correct. Technically, I still have until at the half hour mark is when I have another call. So if anybody has questions, I'm free for the next 20 minutes.
Yeah, so yeah, let's I'll help moderate this Q&A. So yeah, if folks have questions, just go ahead and throw them in the chat or send them directly to me. I know one that I would personally like to start with. So you and I have met several times. I think we initially met at the Chicago convention in 2017. That was a while ago. Gosh, that was rough because I remember you talking to our delegation, and because we were both comrades from the South, you had told us about the rally and invited us to come. And yeah, I know. I think about that
God.
and my blood fucking runs cold. That was the first time I was introduced to you.
I remember that. Now that here's the thing, it's funny, like, and this is why I love being in this space, because you mentioned Chicago. It was comrades from Tennessee, from both Nashville, and I remember Chattanooga. We had some good friends down there that we like talked to the most, and we talked about stuff like that, which we know how that went.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that so obviously, like, I have followed you on social media for a while. And one of the things that I remember you talking about, and probably talking with T as well, is talking about Latin American history and talking about socialists and how a lot of times, especially American socialists, focus so much on places like the Soviet Union and Germany and England and things like that. And I remember pointedly one thing that you had conveyed was that United States of America, these socialists that we are around should pay more attention and learn more from Latin America than they should even try to attempt to learn from places over in Europe and places over in the Soviet Union or in China, just because obviously the conditions are very different. So that was a while ago. One, do you still agree with that? And B, if you do, can you elaborate a little bit more?
Sure. So here's what I would say to that. Do I still agree with that? I would almost say yes and no to that. And here's why I would say yes and no. I would say mostly yes, in that I do believe when I think about the movement in the United States, I think it's so wrong for, even if people think, oh, we should temper our rhetoric and say we're going to be like Sweden, not Venezuela, because so people can, well, I think that's such a misguided approach for many different reasons. And we can talk about, oh, well, see, Sweden's social democracy, which it is, but that's a whole different thing. The difference is Sweden is like 90% white, right? Like, this is a very homogenous society, right? When you look at the United States, which is multiracial, which has once again, which has a large Black population, which are descendants of, slaves, which has population demographics very similar to Latin America, right? And not just that, but I look at the United States as a society that for almost an entire history has been deeply unequal to levels that are not the case in European social democracy, right? Latin America, Venezuela, also societies that have a history of being deeply unequal, right? I tell all my, my Bernie crats out there, and don't get me wrong, I love Bernie, voted for him, all that good stuff. If Bernie got elected president, you think he can just click the socialism button and we're all good? No, you will see a backlash against Bernie like you've seen against all these leftists in Latin America whenever they take power, right? Because of how entrenched the elites are in these countries, right? And that's why I say mostly yes, in that I think there's so many lessons that we can be learning from Latin America that I think are more applicable to the United States than lessons we'd learn in other parts of the world because of the demographic and historical similarities. But at the same time, I say a little bit of no, only because if there's anything I've developed a greater appreciation for during my time in national leadership on DSA, right, engaging with movements across the world, is that every place is unique, right? And if there's one fundamental principle that we should always have as leftists, is to adapt to our local conditions, right? Socialism in the United States is going to look different than socialism in Venezuela, just like socialism in Venezuela looks different than socialism in Cuba, right? We got to adapt to our local conditions, and rather than cutting and pasting models from anywhere, right, we got to develop our own models that are embedded, once again, as Steele was mentioning, in our communities, right? Engaging with our neighbors, once again, so we develop our own flavor of something that works for us, right? And what's interesting, something that I got from Venezuela is that, just like I said, Venezuelan socialism, very different from Cuban socialism, right? And they still get along great, right? I also use the example of the Zapatistas, right? I feel like people in the United States sometimes like put these examples up against each other, like, oh, MLs have to defend Cuba, anarchists have to defend the Zapatistas, and they're way different and we hate each other. When if you actually ask Zapatistas or Cubans, they both love each other and have mutual respect for each other and think they're both working on the same goals. So once again, I think it's okay to have different models and use, and once again, adapt to our material conditions, which are going to be different in different places. So once again, mostly yes, but a little bit of no. Once again, dialectic. We all evolve. We all change.
Great, thank you. So this next question comes from Tristan, who is a comrade in the chapter who's currently in Guatemala. So he says, I'm currently in Guatemala where a national strike is happening on Thursday. I've been working here for like 15 years, but based out of Tennessee. I'm pretty new to DSA, but haven't yet found ways to overlap my international solidarity work and my DSA work. I'm curious, at the chapter or the regional level, what opportunities do y'all see for rank and file member involvement in international DSA work? Or if there's a chapter doing a lot of strong international work that y'all think are good examples of how to go about doing this kind of work.
Great question. And oh my goodness, a lot to unpack there. So first of all, holy shit, you're in Guatemala where, from what I've been seeing on news reports, things have been starting to pop off against Giammattei, right, because of like the COVID response. And it's amazing. I did not know a national strike was happening on Thursday. And part of that is because of how difficult it's been in the United States to hear about what's actually happening in Guatemala. All I've been able to catch wind of is, once again, social media. Because I'm in Virginia, there's a very large Central American diaspora here and a lot of Guatemalans. So I see people, Giammattei renuncia and things like that. But once again, U.S. media is so focused on right-wing narratives and, oh, how can we talk about the Cuban protests, blah, 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 completely ignoring what's going on in Guatemala. So that's extremely remarkable. The second thing I would say to that, there's a couple different things. Going back to my shameless plug of Resolution 14, right? One of the provisions in there, this is why I love Resolution 14, one of the provisions in there is the development of local chapter toolkits, right? To give chapters the resources to be able to build their own local internationalism working groups. And those can take any sort of flavor that they want, right? As far as an example of a successful one, and I'll talk a little bit about why this is, those people can probably draw in their own conclusions, right? New York City has a very strong, robust anti-war working group. That's probably, from what I've seen on the national level, easily the most like, I don't know, institutionally sound, like actually built up, like local working group that focuses on international issues. And there's a reason for that, because New York City itself is huge, right? It's very tough. Like I'm from Richmond, Virginia, small chapter. It's very tough for us in these small chapters to have the infrastructure or even the energy to like begin to branch out into those sorts of issues. Thank you so much, Steele. It was a pleasure. Yeah, it's very tough to like be able to branch out into these more specific issues, despite the fact that they're very critically important. And this is why we want to begin the process of facilitating local chapter toolkits. Another thing that I'm going to plug here as well for you, Tristan, although, because I don't know if you were here when I plugged this earlier, our DSA International Committee, right? Anybody can apply, and I will post this link here, especially members abroad. I strongly encourage applying, right? Because we love getting members that are actually in other countries, right? And we love using these national spaces for members abroad to still be able to engage with the organization, especially on international issues, right? I think that'd be a good place for you to potentially get involved and link with other people that are doing this work. But once again, and as far as like tangible things that locals can do, there's a couple different things. One, I mentioned anti-war, right, that New York City has been doing. I feel like anti-war is typically a very simple thing that locals can like get local coalitions around, right? Start an anti-war working group that reaches out to local groups to do anti-war action. Whenever there's this was particularly important and effective during the the airstrike against Soleimani in Iran, right? It was our anti-war working group in New York City that helped, drive major protests in New York City. So like things like that, I think are particularly important. Another tangible thing that I will mention, the Cuban embargo, right? What's really interesting, like the last times I've like talked to people in Cuba or whatever, something they mention is the importance of local city councils passing resolutions saying, hey, that embargo is pretty fucked up, right? I think this is something that locals can do as well. And even us in the South might be surprised at the results we can get. And don't get me wrong, I'm not in, we pressure our politicians first. That's the only kind of thing we can do kind of guy. But of course, to me, that is an avenue of struggle. Biloxi, Mississippi, I believe, passed a resolution saying, so we should lift the embargo. And why did they do this? Because they know the economic benefits that these Gulf Coast ports would get from trade with Cuba. So once again, even places in the South, like you might be surprised, there are ways that we can do to pressure our local governments to at least try and move the needle on these sorts of international issues.
Awesome. Yes, Tristan has been doing a ton of work since I've known him for 5 years now or so, going back and forth between here and Guatemala and Mexico. And hey, yes. So actually one of the things so I am currently on the National Political Education Committee.
Oh, yeah.
So we have been doing a lot of work, and obviously we're doing a lot of stuff. And one of the things that I hope that I can see working alongside the International Committee is one thing that I've noticed, especially even I've lived in Nashville my entire life, and know that a lot of leftists in their cities don't even know the nationalities or ethnicities of people who live in their own city. I give this example all the time, but we have the largest population of Kurdish people outside of Kurdistan, which is amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. There's a huge Kurdish refugee population from both Syrian Kurds as well as Iraqi Kurds. And one of the things that I especially hope to do is not just have these, not just have lessons on like what is internationalism and why it's important, but also giving these, hopefully getting chapters to understand like these are the kinds of people that you have in your city. These are the people that are involved in your city. One thing that's been going on lately is there have been actually protests in our own city about Tigray over in Africa because there's a lot of stuff happening, especially along the side of the refugee camps, which I believe was the impetus for the initial protest. But the thing is I am pretty involved in the left organizing, no idea it was happening. And that's personally embarrassing. Like we should be the people who are there showing solidarity, even if it's just like you're saying, getting people to, denounce what's happening or to support an international movement. I'm hoping that as somebody, my parents grew up in Minnesota, and Minnesota has a very large Somali population as well. We're trying to create a multiracial working class organization, and that's one of the ways that you do it, is trying to, being able to speak about those issues, but also being able to work with those people locally. There is a large, especially with a lot of the ways that here in the South, I'm sure you can empathize, a lot of the ways that our cities are segregated. Right now, there is three different major eviction sort of like hot zones, one in a deaf and hard of hearing community. I know that if I remember correctly, your parents are deaf or hard of hearing. Yes. So we have, I'll put a plug. Our Red Door Collective is working alongside of them and helping organize. We also have the Mosaic Apartments, which are predominantly Spanish-speaking, I believe also indigenous from a bunch of different Spanish-speaking countries in Latin America, as well as there is a very large Coptic and Egyptian community here that is also facing that, because we also have a huge Coptic population as well. But these are in all different areas of the city because they're heavily segregated. And we also have a giant Palestinian community. And these are all sorts of things that I think, as leftists, we have if we're actually wanting to make like an international movement and we're wanting to see how to do that locally, you have to just at the very least, be cognizant of who you have where you are. And hopefully we can bring, I'm not asking people to like go out and fill out surveys and being like, so where are you from? But understanding, you have these people here, support them, let them lead, do what you can.
Yo, 1,000,000%. And first of all, Nashville sounds amazing. Holy shit. I've literally never been. Now I want to visit, maybe get some Coptic food somewhere and some Kurd food or something. I don't know, any place. Like,
yeah, you have a couch at my house whenever you want to visit Austin.
Well, there we go. Likewise, you always have a place to stay in Richmond. But, that is crucially important. That's something that Blanca and myself have talked about endlessly. Political education, right? It's astounding how backward a lot of people, average people in the United States, are when it comes to foreign policy issues, right? A lot of people just have like an interventionist mentality, just like naturally, right? So like political education is so critically important. I've been so happy to see the growth that the National Political Education Committee has been having. And I talked recently to Guy from Charlotte, right? Who's also on NPEC, right? We love Guy, right? I talked to Guy recently about, and this is a conversation we should have at some point, maybe offline, about how NPEC and the IC can maybe collaborate in the future, right? I'd love like some sort of like, I don't know, liaison between the two committees or something like that, just so we're producing similar, there we go, beautiful, we'll make it happen. So we're like producing similar like materials or whatever, and making sure that internationalism is, represented and stuff like that. And because the political education aspect is so important. And that's a fantastic point you make there, I mean, as far as like power mapping your own communities, right? Like in Virginia, we have Virginia is the only place in the country where some of our communities have Central Americans make a majority of the population, right? Up here in Northern Virginia, Woodbridge, we literally call it Little San Salvador. There's pupuserias everywhere. It's amazing. In Richmond, there's a large Salvadoran population, right? So that's definitely something that we definitely have tried to work harder on as well. But that's a fantastic point. I love that. And once again, we'll reconnect offline on this because I think that's really important work we could collaborate on.
Yeah, definitely. And yes, we actually have had folks head down to Cuba, not as part of like the broader left organizing group. I know that we had a DSA member, not through DSA, has visited and actually currently lives in Korea right now. But I agree. It would be wonderful to send those delegations. And yeah, I would really love to talk to you about not just like talking about what internationalism is, but getting locals to not just care about it, but figure out how to actually do, some of the basic things that go beyond like BDS. It is 8:23. I am going to conclude it here because I would love to give you, just 7 or 8 minutes back, run to the bathroom, wolf down a Nutri-Grain bar or something like that. So thank you so much. It's been an honor. I'm super happy that this was actually able to come together. This has been super important to me. And yeah, hopefully our committed anti-imperialists will stay in power within DSA. And yes, fingers very hardly crossed.
No, absolutely. And thank you for the invitation. I will always have love, a soft spot in my heart for yourself, for all the homies in Nashville, the homies in Tennessee, right? I would love to do more like regional Southern work at some point. I was just in Atlanta over the weekend. It was good to see some of the homies in Atlanta again, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be extremely cool. And yeah, I also hope that we can continue doing good work on the NPC. And I love talking to people like you in particular on this meetup because you've been around the block and you remember when the IC was really shitty. So once again, keeping it not shitty, I think would be good.
I remember DSA used to be the Israel leftist organization of the country, and that was
Exactly.
Anyways, that's a whole other topic. But like I said, have a good evening, Austin. Enjoy your next call. And Tristan, keep safe and have a great time at the strike this coming Thursday. Have a good evening, everybody.
Much love. We'll be in touch.
All right. Bye-bye.